Okay, pot's right. Okay, listen, thanks for coming. All right, first of all, you know who I am. I'm Jim Myles. Okay, work for DynCorp International. Used to be do a little bit of aviation maintenance in the Army. I've been asked to moderate the panel to discuss really aviation life cycle maintenance, sustainment, logistics. Really, hopefully, the end state that we would have here today is to have talked about the journey we've been on for the last 12 years, 12 to 14 years here, where Army aviation has been in the forefront of everything that has to do with supporting and defending our country against all enemies, both foreign and domestic, in particular in Iraq and Afghanistan. Okay, and what we know is that we've been on a journey in Army aviation on the sustainment side that has been unlike any other time in our history. You know that, I know that. What we also know is that in the last 14 years, since 9/11, there's a few things that occurred. Number one, the op tempo has been the highest it's ever been in Army aviation, and the second thing that's occurred is that our country provided support to us for Army aviation that is different than we've ever had in the past. I'm talking about in terms of tools. So what I want to talk about today is, first of all, is talk about the journey we've been on, from training to deploying to fighting and redeploying and resetting and going back and doing the R for Gen cycle. Talk about those things that have been inserted inside of Army aviation that has helped us sustain the fleet. Talk about what worked, talk about what didn't work, and what are the things that we know that actually worked during combat that we need to sustain during this time where we've transitioned back to whatever this state of readiness is that we're doing in Army aviation. I wouldn't say we're back in garrison, because I'm not sure we'll ever be back in garrison. Okay, this is not about Myles talking. What we have here in front of us here that they've been mandatorily invited to attend with us and provide participation is, we got some great Americans here. First of all, Lieutenant Colonel Matt Isaacson, who's part of United States Army Special Operations Aviation Command, is going to be taking over the ASB in Hawaii for the 25th here this summer. That's Matt Isaacson, the guy that is responsible for running all of Army field maintenance for AMCOM, which is providing all the reset work and preset work for Army field maintenance, if you will, is Sammy Burns from AMCOM. Chief of Staff for AMCOM is Colonel Don Nitty, who was running AFM, but on a weak moment here, Lynn Collier moved Don up to make him the Chief of Staff. Don came from the Department of the Army staff and really helped lead the effort inside of AFM to make it what it is today, which is really a very well standardized, high-performing outfit. And of course, we've got Garner Pogue, who is the Corpus Christi commander, lots of experience in the aviation maintenance field, who now runs our depot maintenance, the premier depot in our Army. Al Stiller, where's Al? Al Stiller works in the aviation branch and directorate inside of G4. Very, very important guy in this field when it comes to resourcing the fight. And the last person we have here is John Beck, Mr. John Beck, who's the Chief of Staff for PEO Aviation. You can't talk maintenance unless you talk program management, PEO Aviation, and fleet management in terms of condition-based maintenance and all those elements, if you will. So that's kind of the set. What I want to do is kind of moderate and lead kind of a discussion here about where we've been for the last 14 years, some of the things that has been put in place, and kind of how did it work? And what are our thoughts? What are our thoughts about condition-based maintenance? What are our thoughts about how we've been able to manage the fleet? How did the contractors do? What did AFMs do to support us? What was our battle rhythm for maintaining a sustainment of aircraft in the fight? How did you do that at the tactical, operational, strategic level to make sure that aircraft were sustained at an op tempo that were 100 hours per aircraft per month, which is a pretty phenomenal rate, if you will, when you think about it? Because guess what? We are manned at 14 hours per aircraft per month in terms of maintainers, in terms of maintenance dollars, and yet you're flying at 75 to 100 hours per aircraft per month. How do you fill that gap in terms of people, equipment, training, tactics, techniques, procedures? really interested in what our non-commissioned officer leadership has to say about what it means to our soldiers here in terms of capabilities-based training instead of actually platform-based training. So, with that, any questions about what we want to do today? And listen, this is not an interaction among these 06s here. You guys, there's a lot of brain power here, so please feel free, raise your hand, ask the questions, do what you have to do, because we want to get it on the table. The end state, hopefully, is a recorded event that says, here's kind of what worked right, here's what's missing, here's some things we need to think about, and here's what we don't need to forget next time we get into the fight because it was so important to us this time. Right? Makes sense? Okay, so let's just talk about the fact what happened in 911. What do we think the stance and balance was of our organization, of our maintenance fleet, of our fleet when 911 came? Thoughts? Microphone.
Sir? I think we were prepared for a major decisive operation or two.
You got to hold it. He's got to record it.
Okay, I think we were prepared for a major decisive operation or two or three, but not continuous for over a decade.
Okay. How about the condition of the fleet themselves? Garner, where were you at?
Sir, I was with the 82nd. I think the condition of the fleet was good. I think that overall, just from the units that I was in leading up to that, 10th Mountain Division and in the 82nd, I think the condition of the fleet was up to the task. I think what was possibly not up to the task was our tooling, our sets, kits, and outfits, and I think how we postured ourselves to rapidly resupply on the battlefield was something we had to catch up with, and certainly something you were involved with as the AMCOM commander as well.
How about you, Don?
So back to the condition of the fleet, I agree with Garner that the fleet was in good condition, but I think through the process of the war and execution of the Aviation Reset program, we have found a gap. And we've proven that our phase maintenance program does an excellent job maintaining near-term readiness and safety. I mean, you can look at our records from before the war and through the war and see that we have safe, capable airplanes. But through the Aviation Reset program, we've touched almost 5,000 aircraft or 5,000 reset events. And on a regular basis, we find structural and corrosion that is not caught during normal phase maintenance. And so, one of the things is what we've learned and where we're going moving forward is working very closely with the PEO to do some analysis to figure out how we could potentially fill that gap at some point. I know the PEO has done a lot of analysis that shows over the next several years with new buys and recap and living off of what Reset has provided us so far, our fleets will continue to be very healthy. But at some point in the future, as procurement starts to go down and potentially recap goes down, there may be the need for another program to look a little deeper on occasion, since we got rid of the full-blown depot program where every aircraft sees the depot on a reoccurring basis, where we take a deeper look at the aircraft.
Okay.
So.
John Beck, from a PEO perspective in terms of fleet readiness, stockage levels, if you will, for parts, and you may or may not have an idea. Rick Turner, you might have an idea. Thoughts?
Yeah, initially from my perspective, from parts, I'm pretty sure right after the war began, we figured out we were about $2 billion short on the number of spare parts we were going to have to buy. And I think it probably took a couple of years to get that stuff in the pool, in the supply line. So it probably took 1 to 2, maybe 3 years for us to get fully acclimated to a op tempo, which was now 60 or 70 hours a month in combat operations. So it takes a long time. There's a long lag or lead time to make sure we can start getting up to that op tempo.
Okay, Rick Turner's been drafted. He used to be an SES at IMMC. Not a very good-looking guy, but occasionally he's smart.
He's right, as usual, General. Myles is right about my looks. I can tell you on 4 September 2001, I was in the Pentagon in front of the vice asking for those billions of dollars. General Sullivan was there as the AMCOM commander, and General Dodgen, the future commander, was in the room, and he would not listen to us. He basically kicked us out of the room because he wasn't getting a lot of information from operational commanders that we had a problem. But I can tell you from a wholesale level, we had a major shortfall in aviation spares, and as John mentions, it takes a good 2 years to get some of these parts in once you order them. So what concerns me is we go back into that down spin of no funding, and when we get to, back then we had 70% stock availability for aviation spares, and that was terrible, we knew it, but we didn't have the funding to buy it. So I just ask that when we get back to that low level of obligation authority at the wholesale level, that the commanders in the field make it very vocal when we start getting spares problems.
So the idea is steady state as we wind down, watching the funding levels from a G4 perspective in aviation, making sure that we understand the impact on spares on a working capital fund has got to be right. Sergeant Major, you remember from a readiness state of view in terms of parts was out there. Let's talk about for a moment the readiness of our soldiers to be able to do maintenance in a high op tempo combat environment. What are your thoughts?
I think soldiers were trained and ready. We had already been into Bosnia and Kosovo for several years, so we were trained and ready to operate in that environment. We were also working in task force configuration to support that. But I will tell you, when I went into Iraq during the first iteration in 2003, we had all 47 of these 701 Charlie model engines sitting there in Iraq on the ramp. And as aircraft would come across, we would rebuild those engines out of the parts that were usable and then send aircraft around north. But there were 200 and some, General Pillsbury told us this, sitting on the seawall down in CCAD awaiting to be inducted, but we hadn't secured the funding yet to start those lines and induct.
Yeah. Okay, so that's an important point. And what a lot of people didn't see was the fact that there was an incredible amount of effort that came between industry and the military during that, in the Army in that time, to find unique ways, performance-based logistics, turning things around to ramp up at a very quick pace here. Probably I wouldn't say we were throwing up, but we were very close to it in terms of trying to do everything we could to build capacity here during that first time. Anybody see something differently in terms of what happened in 9/11 and what our thoughts were? What was our stance and balance moving forward? Fleet, ACE inspections. ACE inspections, we were behind on ACE inspections. ACE inspections being what's our depot input into it, and where are we as an Army? We had holes in our formation. That's what we had said throughout the rest of the Army, and quite frankly, in aviation we were. Not bad, but could have been a lot better. For sure, what we knew is the op tempo we were going to fly in was not going to be where it needed to be. Any thoughts on the readiness of the aircraft in terms of having mods on aircraft that are needed to go conduct combat ops in Iraq and Afghanistan?
From my perspective, I worked in the Pentagon and FDV right when 9/11 hit, and the Army had made conscious decisions for 3 or 4 years before that not to invest in all the modifications we knew we were going to need. The ASC program had been terminated. We actually had some missile programs terminated, the Hellfire, things like that, and a bunch of other modifications for, I guess, aircraft and soldier protection. So I guess we just need to make sure the next time we start thinking about, hey, we can take risk, hey, should we take that kind of risk, or should we invest the money in these kind of things that we know we're going to need? And the other part about the modifications now is they're on the aircraft, but now the Army has to decide whether they want to maintain those things in the fleets after the war is over. A lot of these things are just basically for combat use only. So once the combat operations end, they're going to be required to take those off the aircraft, and soldiers won't be allowed to use it unless the Army makes a decision to keep them on. So that's just some stuff to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's have a little discussion about once we're in the fight, okay, you've got multiple brigades deployed simultaneously, both Iraq and also in Afghanistan. And there's a rhythm going on. What's working inside? What was working from your perspective, commanders and support battalion commanders and also soldiers here? What was working that you didn't realize how good it was working, or what really did do good that helped sustain the fight better than you thought? What are your thoughts?
Well, clearly the communication and the synchronization inside the enterprise was critical, and I think now soldiers have been in the fight long enough that I think they understand some of what goes on behind the curtain. But we used to do synchronization conferences twice a year, which was critical to make sure that we were orchestrating all the R4Gen. To this day, we still have monthly VTC with the cab commanders and the BAMOs in theater to bring issues immediately out of the field and work them. So information flowing was critical, and I think that's one of the lessons learned we need to continue going forward, is that we keep these venues where we share information and work issues collectively.
Did you feel like in the fight? Go ahead, Matt. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think what really worked well, thanks to everyone in Huntsville to put it together, was reset. So I think we assume that it's there now. I mean, it'll most likely go away as we know it today, but without reset, and that's across the special operations aviation community, and when I was in conventional and 101 as well, I don't think we could have done what we did. And there are a variety of details we've all experienced with reset, but reset truly made it possible.
Yeah, go ahead. That's all right.
How you doing, sir? Master Sergeant Giroux, Connecticut National Guard. I have to say that probably from our perspective, the TAMPs and what they provided to the theater aviation maintenance, the cab commanders probably didn't realize the resource that they had, the ability to provide oversight on TPE and TEP equipment, and also covering down on when those units left Iraq and all that equipment that cascaded out of Iraq. That all fell on the TAMPs, and all that depot level maintenance and the LARs and the MECs and the engineer calls and everything that had to be made in theater. They were all controlled by those guys. And I say that was probably one of the more critical things that happened that we need to sustain that probably people didn't even realize was there.
You are absolutely right. It's one thing that hasn't been talked about probably in years that should be, is the fact that most people don't realize that the AVCRADs were actually opconned to AMCOM to be deployed in theater to provide a theater aviation maintenance point here to help do everything from provide additional AVM level support to, just like he had said, ground support equipment, special tools, test set equipment, all the things that you want to be done. In fact, as we started to draw down Iraq, we used the TAMP and the AVCRADs forward to go chase AMCOM parts, go chase our AMCOM special tools equipment to help do the inventory control points. Very, very important, critical thing as you put all your tools out on the battlefield and you want to bring them back in. That's a very, very good point, Master Sergeant Giroux, and that's huge for that capability.
Sir, CW5 Butler, 10th Cab Bamo. Couple trips to both places. Bottom line, being in maintenance now for a long time, I can remember crew chiefs coming in with all the skills, and I'd give them a ratty old toolbox with 10 tools in it. In the last 12 years, I have seen more modernization of tools and test sets than I've seen ever. And our soldiers are actually leaps and bounds over where we were 15 years ago. And it's also easily accountable. That is a sustain on my part. Keep the tools coming just the way they are and keep modernizing for the next generation. Make them adaptable.
That's a great point. There's a lot of funding that came in to take care of those things. Everything from, heck, we were finally overhauling AGPUs.
Yes,
now, we
sir.
did it at our missile depot, believe it or not, but that's okay. But you're right. It's about giving us the tools, the ground support equipment, the tools that our soldiers needed that they didn't have for literally decades. So I don't know how you did it, Rick, but I'm glad you did it.
Great job.
Yeah. But a very important point. So let's talk about reset for a second, okay? When it started out as kind of a preset reset, if you guys may or may not recall, it was one where it said, we got to get the aircraft modified to go into the fight. Okay, it's about putting Blue Force Tracker on there, or it's about putting CMOS on different aircraft, it's about getting the latest piece of equipment on there, the ACE, the comms radios, all the things that needed to get done. Then it was preset. Now you got aircraft coming back that's called reset. Okay, so here's what happened. About $5 billion was put into our space over a period of 3 to 4 years. How many think there's any standardization in the formation of how you're going to do reset with contractors on the battlefield, both downrange and also back there? Who's responsible for doing the safety and standardization of that? Pretty sporty, okay? I used to call it AR-95-Mark McMillan, AR-95-Gary Adams, AR-95-Sammy Burns, whoever is in charge of that particular reset site, because they did what they thought was best, what was best that they could possibly do, because it's the only standard we had. We didn't have an arms team inspection for a contractor. But what you had was work that was being done to take the aircraft coming back in the fight, turn them upside down, getting rid of all the sand, the dust, resetting the aircraft and getting them back in. It's got to be done to some sort of a 95-20, some sort of a contractual standard. So on that journey with reset, that it was an idea that was really a follow-on to Kosovo, and actually it was Desert Storm. We had not really necessarily learned the lessons. What you've done now, I think, for you guys, and you may want to talk about this, Sammy, is the fact that you now have a standardization. You have an arms team. It's called ATP. I don't know. Whenever you send it down to DynCorp, it killed me. But it was you've come up with a standard, and now you have some sort of a contract maintenance capacity with. So please.
Okay, so we'll kind of step back and go back to the beginning of the war efforts where you're using the CFT contract. So whether you know or not, we had a reset office. That's all we did. We just ran the reset program. We had no maintainers. We had no contract. We relied on CFT contract service providers, another section within AMCOM, OLR, to help us execute that maintenance. And if you were around in 2003 and 4, anybody that could turn a wrench was doing a reset for us. We had sites everywhere. So as we learned lessons, we integrated, brought the OLR and the reset team together, stood up the AFMD organization, and then we started looking at contract requirements, because we had lived this CFT thing for a long time, and it served the purpose that we needed, but they were trying to adjust our behaviors on how we managed the contract. So it was predominantly in the beginning time and materials, throw money at it, put contractors on it and execute it. So we looked at that and said, okay, it's done its job. We need an AMCOM managed contract, because CFTs in Oklahoma and dealing with those guys wasn't always easy. So they started shoving us down roads like, we need you to firm fixed price all your efforts, because that's kind of the feel of the Army now. Everything's going to be firm fixed price. We started seeing the cost of this thing just skyrocket. So we started working on developing our own contract, and that's what AFM is today. So we looked at how do we do that? How do we do it best, and how does it meet some long-term requirements for the Army? So lots of people, lots of work, and about 18 months worth of development, source selection to get through this thing, but we standardized, and we looked at a best value type contract. So it's a combination. There's some firm fixed price, management overhead part of the contract. There's some cost plus incentive fee pieces of the contract where they're doing things that are well-defined, reset, MWO applications. That way, if they do very well, we'll write them a check. They save us money. We share that cost savings with them. And then there is, for lack of a better word, still some time and material. So when units want some support, embedded contract support, or want to pass back phases, we can take that workload on. Now, what General Myles was talking about is, of course, through this, always as a requirement, 95-20 and monitoring contracts, and we got very good at it in the process, a little too good, I think, for what General Myles cares for. But so now we do an APT every 6 months. So semi-annually, there's an APT going on, and we're going out to sites, and we're looking at how the contractor manages his operation. So 95-20 tells you exactly how to do that, what you should look at, they have to have procedures in place, how they're going to execute the maintenance programs. We provide quality oversight, double checking what they're doing, GFRs, managing and watching flight operations for the contractor, because they're doing those kinds of things. So we instituted all that, and it's pretty rigorous on these guys, and we come out with a team of folks to take a look at them. And that's a scoring process, and whether they get an incentive fee or not. If they don't do well on those things, it can affect their incentive fees that they're eligible for. So the other piece of that was, are we doing what we need to do correctly as the government guys overseeing the contract? So there's an AMRA team within AMCOM, Fred Piper, and I don't know if you know him, Fred Piper and his group, that come out and take a look at us and say, are we doing our job correctly in accordance with proper regulations? So there's checks upon checks. So there's kind of an arms team looking at our government folks, but we have the APT, Aviation Program Team, looking at the contracts. I would like to divest a little bit and go back, as we talked a little bit earlier. So where did we start this thing? I mean, I retired in 2004, came to work in the reset office, and I've been there ever since. So we were deploying Alpha and Lima model Blackhawks. We were deploying, did we deploy any Alpha model Apaches? We did. Alpha model Apaches and some D model Chinooks. We've modernized all those aircraft. So, and I remember, sir, I mean, it was before your time of the General Pillsbury days, and sir, you remember of just getting beat up over being able to get pieces and parts to meet requirements, and I'm sure the depot was getting beat up pretty hard about producing those things. It was very ugly the first 3 years until the parts buys started catching up with the requirements. But again, we modernized all those aircraft in the process too. General Myles talked about preset. Very hard, probably 2005, when we finally started actually looking up and saying, hey, we've got to synchronize these efforts. You got to get preset aligned with the reset, because we saw then that it was going to continue to cycle. You know, Desert Shield, Desert Storm, we went over and we came back. I went on that one too. We all came back, and then we did the STIR program on the aircraft. So we had to link these two things together, and it was very hard because PEO was kind of managing the modification piece of it, and we were managing the reset piece. So some key folks came together, and we started synchronizing. We know this unit's going again. We got to get the mods on. One-touch efforts to get mods installed on aircraft while they're in reset to the extent that possible. Now, in some cases, it just weren't enough kits available. But so we've worked through all that. We learned a lot. We implemented all this in AFM. We are actually 1 year in the AFM contract, and we are looking now. It's a 5-year contract. We're looking now to what does the next contract look like, because reset's going to be done in probably FY16. So we need to structure the contract to perform to what the next new requirements are, and it's kind of pass back maintenance, MWO efforts, but it's got to be something that we can quickly spool up if something like this happens, and again, we've got to support those kind of efforts. So I'll shut up for a while.
Okay. Let me ask from our soldiers side of the house here. Okay, you had contractor maintenance here that initially was doing preset, doing some work, but not directly affecting you. Then they come over to the fight and actually provide increased capability with you. Then you redeploy back. They're resetting aircraft at your home station. What was the impact on our soldiers in terms of their ability to understand how to do maintenance, actually performing maintenance? What were their skill sets for troubleshooting? Did they get better? Did they get worse? And what did you do to overcome some of the issues in terms of compatibility with contractors on the battlefield, even at home? Just hold up close.
Yes, sir. Both times in Afghanistan, I fired contractors.
You fired contractors?
Didn't need them. Soldiers will do. That's a perfect environment, not just captive audience. They love it over there. They love being deployed because they get PT, chow, sleep, and they get left alone to work on their aircraft. They love it. You're going to have the CFT embedded there. You make them part of the team. Mm-hmm. But I don't need 300 for a brigade-size element. You need to look at your op tempo, figure out how many phase teams you need to do, because there's too much hand wave. So we end up with 450 contractors for brigade task force. What you need to look at is, okay, how many phases do I need to do this year? What's our op tempo going to be? Divide that up, how many green suit phase teams, and then employ your CFTs to do what they're supposed to do, to help. They should never be the main effort when you're deployed, because a lot of things can happen with that, and you can end up on your rear end. We've already seen it with the contract troubles we've had in Afghanistan. If a contract comes in weak, you're on your rear end on bank time. And then along with that also, as we come back to readiness in the States, everybody, from days since I've been in MTP, 50% is your bank time. You're a bad boy if you got less. I would tell you that stateside, I don't think that should be our goal. I think our bank time goal should be somewhere around 40 to about 43. Because anything more than that, we're spending more money than we actually have, and we don't need it. Because bank time in combat is, okay, how long can I fly before I got to do major maintenance? That's all that tells the CG. Yeah. How long can I fly my birds for major maintenance? Am I worried about that in training and peacetime? As long as I can generate the training time, for the boss, then I'm not spending that phase dollar, and I'm actually getting good training out of those hours, is what I would say.
Let me ask you, were you provided guidance on how you would use your contractors on the battlefield in terms of numbers of phase teams they had to do, or would they do unscheduled maintenance or scheduled, or was it your call?
It was pretty much my call, and I
Okay.
worked only RC East and RC North the
Okay.
last 2 tours, sir. But the bottom line was, I found that if you want that pit crew on the flight line to turn birds, you put green suiters out there.
Okay.
You got an NCO that knows how to troubleshoot. And I think when it comes, I don't care who the contract is, who the prime is, I think they are best set for set piece phase type operations. But it's intrinsic. When you get there, you need to take and ask to see how they do a phase. And
That was
it's in
all-
the book, but you need to set it up and say, okay, everybody on this contract, by day 3, this is what I expect. By day 6, this is what I expect. Because you get over there and a team at Bagram
Yeah.
is knocking out a hawk phase in 15 days, and you go down to Shank, and the guys are knocking them out in 9. Okay, what's the difference?
That was always the intent, was to give the brigade commanders, it was their guys, they could task order the way they wanted to. Let me ask a couple others. Thoughts on impacts to soldiers' ability to sustain their maintenance proficiencies in terms of now Private Myles is now Sergeant Myles, and now he's in charge of the phase team. Is he better off able to do it or not? Or what are some of y'all's thoughts?
This issue is near and dear to me, as I'm sure it is to most people in this room. But I've had the opportunity to spend time in 3 maintenance commands with excellent maintenance soldiers, from Apache maintainers to every other airframe you can imagine. So that said, in the 90s and early 2000s, before a major contract force, soldiers all the way from sheet metal, prop, and rotor, I mean, everybody had to figure it out down to the component repair level. So when I found myself in a special operations aviation unit with 50 contractors per battalion, the immediate effect was great to the soldiers. You had skilled soldiers and skilled civilian maintainers that, frankly, had just been soldiers. But over time, we saw that evolve into PC officers. Realistically, and this is no blame on PC officers, but starting with their, blue suit workforce, with their civilian workforce first, because they were paid firm fixed price to show up every day anyways. Start with them, and when there was low op tempo, you might have no work for the soldiers. So over a period of 3 to 4 years, we found that we lost the basics. We lost the basics of preventive maintenance. We lost the basics of corrosion control. We lost all of those basics, and I'm sure all of us saw that. And right now, in the 160th SOAR, we're reaping those challenges. So as we go forward, though, I mean, it's for everyone in this room to decide how we do that. But for our part, we are setting standards. So the most rudimentary standard we're setting is, of course, there's how many combat crews you have to be prepared to send. That involves both launch and recovery and the crew members themselves. But above and beyond that, we're also setting aside combat power crews. So, if you will, phase teams. So those phase teams, we're setting phase standards for time frames, but also how many phase teams by MDS each battalion has to do. So a PC officer starts with that green suit workforce first now. And once that, every day, every phase is filled up, then we go to the contract workforce. At least that's where we're going in the future. So what do you do with that excess capacity? Well, we're using that excess capacity, if you will, of the civilian workforce to reduce our costs. And I know I'm getting ahead of ourselves here, but cost-wise readiness is really where we're going, because we've seen our flying hour rates per MDS triple
Let's do this a little
in the
bit
last
longer.
10 years.
But yes, we're going to get on there. Okay. Any other thoughts? Sergeant Major, you got any thoughts, or anybody over here on that? Okay.
Sir, if I could, on the on transition. Sorry, Sergeant Major. On transitioning back, I think one of the biggest challenges was not necessarily executing maintenance in theater with soldiers. I think that the reset periods, especially for units that were turning quickly within 12, 15, 18 months, were having challenges as really, and I think at the mid to senior NCO level, where we were transitioning folks out of the units and then back in, and establishing what the readiness level was of those folks. And as we go forward into that, we towards the end of this process, and over the last several years at the depot, we have been doing training for National Guard. And, Guard units come down and do AT at the depot all the time, but we've just now, I think recently, gotten better at having units come in pre-deployment to the depot to get themselves through rapid iterations of special skills, NDT, non-destructive test, welding, soldering, engine services, structural repairs, especially some of the NCOs that have come back in from other assignments, such as recruiting or those types of things. So I think that we're getting better at that, and that's something we need to kind of mark on the wall as something we want to continue. Over.
Agreed.
Sir, I think it's kind of mixed ever since the war started. Before the war started, we had several places where we didn't use our AVIMs properly. We'd work Delta Company soldiers 18 hours a day, and there would be an AVIM or an ASB sitting next door, underutilized, going home at 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
The other thing that I've seen is as op tempo picked up and as we got closer to a drawdown, we weren't allowed to send soldiers, so we would supplement that with contractors downrange, and we've seen some atrophy based upon the fact that you had soldiers sitting in the rear and they weren't maintaining aircraft because their aircraft were downrange, and blue suiters were doing a lot of the phase or scheduled maintenance. I've seen the same thing, though, with the contract workforce. When we went into Iraq, the first iteration, we had less than 70 contractors in the 101st between both brigades. The second rotation, we probably had about 250. But the op tempo, we flew about 70,000 hours between the two brigades. We flew about 250,000 hours the second between the two brigades. So there was a great increase in the amount of hours we were flying, and we knew that you had to be able to turn combat power. Phase teams were the answer to that, but initially some of those contractors come in, trained very well in commercial aviation, but they didn't know jack about maintaining a helicopter or Army forms, records, publications. And we see that fluctuate up and down, all the way up to this day. It's still occurring. So training programs there on both sides. I think the best units have training programs, whether they're downrange or in garrison. I have visited units who tell me that we need to have a TI course. The TI course is still the same as it was when we had a 66 course. 95% of it is still sitting in BNOC at Fort Eustis. What they don't realize is you grow a TI at Illisheim, at Fort Hood, at JBLM, at Fort Campbell, at Fort Bragg,
Right.
through experience and iterations of doing things. It's not by sending a kid to Fort Eustis and sending him through an 8-week BNOC course. And there's where I think we lack. Whether it be NDI, whether it be training technical inspectors or training phase team leaders, we need to get those kids the iterations. And some units do that better than others.
Okay, let's raise it up a little bit. Thanks, Sergeant Major. Let's talk about resourcing the fight here in terms of what we saw and what are we seeing right now. What actually happened that worked out well that we believe if this thing happened tomorrow, had to do it all over again, what would we need to step forward? And is our Army, and I'd ask you guys, is our Army ready to resource Army aviation the same way they were before? Do they get it? Thoughts? Al, you're in the building.
Sir, they don't want to. This is what I hear in the building all the time. They love us in war and they hate us in peacetime because of the money. So yes, I think they will resource us. I do believe that the building gets that they need to continue the funding for the reset program at least 3 years as we slow down for the last piece coming out. And I know the chief is concerned about the OCO stream, but everyone up there realizes the need to ensure that the fleet remains healthy. But I will tell you, when we went in there and briefed the chief, and a lot of people here in this room, or a few of them were there, is the health of the fleet has really gained a lot based on reset. And when we talked already about reset, the chief's concern was, and Colonel Nitti brought it up, is there a potential gap when all of a sudden you don't have this, you can't use reset these interim looks as you go throughout the years? Do you guys need something else? And then that's something responsibly owned by the end of July. So Yes, I think at the end of the day, they know aviation costs, and we have that sacred trust with the ground force commander and the troops, and they know it's going to cost them some money.
Okay. Thoughts, guys?
Yeah, so I struggle with the term reset because reset means something very different for us than it does for almost virtually every other system. So when you're talking about resetting Humvees or resetting trucks, they're overhauling them. It's an overhaul. When we talk about reset of the aviation fleet, we're not zero timing out components unless they're very close to TBO or unless there's a fault found. So when the chief is concerned about, when the chief is concerned with, if it, not necessarily, right, but they're remanufacturing those and they're bringing them up. So I'm not going from program
But
to
there
program.
could be difference in
but
standards for the
there's
aviation
difference in
ground.
that, and it means something different for aviation. So when we talk about that gap, we have to talk about it and I think we should talk about it in terms of overhaul. And there's various things you can do with an overhaul. And I just think that when we talk about reset and the gap in reset, we need to talk about the sustainment strategy for the fleets, and that's clearly PM business. And I'm not sure if you had any thoughts on that at all.
I think if we talk sustainment strategies, we're looking to end our production stuff in the late teens, early 20s, so sustainment strategies will be important. That's when I think we can start having the AIM discussion, because that's probably when that gap will start to widen. We also need to talk about if we implemented lessons learned from the war, all the things that all the maintenance guys have found. Have we changed our maintenance practices? Do we include that kind of stuff, all those improvements? Have we improved the ACE inspection that you talked about, sir? We're supposed to do one on every aircraft every year. Maybe the ACE inspection needs to change a little bit. Maybe we need to expand it a little bit, maybe open the aircraft up a little bit more. When we find stuff during the ACE inspection, you can fix that kind of stuff on the spot, but it's got to get emphasis from the commanders in the field to allow those teams to come in and actually do the work. And they've also had the engineers ask me to help them get a UFR on the table to get better equipment, that they can do their inspections better so they're not so intrusive to the unit. They can do stuff without taking stuff apart. So it's a mix a little bit of everything across the entire aviation enterprise. We can do stuff better, and then we can start filling some of these sustainment gaps we'll see in the future.
Yeah, good point. Good point, because the thought was is that because our ACE inspections were really not where it needed to be, we had a hole in our formation here in terms of capacity for scheduled maintenance here that requires you to go deeper than a phase, but not all the way down to depot overhaul, depot maintenance. So there's something more than that. What we saw over time was when we would fly the aircraft and we'd come back and you put them in a combat environment here, there's some things you need to look at that goes deeper than a phase, and that's this thing called AIM. I think at one point it's called deep cycle maintenance. At the end of the day, it was something more than a phase that you have a responsibility. The graduate level exercise is how do you take the requirement that says I got to do something more than a scheduled phase and rubber sheet that over the life cycle of an aircraft where we got a block Apache, a H-64E that's a brand new airframe. Maybe I don't need to do that until XYZ. I got M models coming in. When does that have to fit in? I got 47 Fs and Gs here, so there's a time that I need to put that in there. I don't need to over-maintain that airplane. So there's a sweet spot, and that's what John's trying to hit in the late teens. Okay, so speaking of over-maintaining airplanes, condition-based maintenance. Okay, that's a tool that we have in our formation now that we didn't have in the past. How did that work for us? And how do we want to use it moving forward? And what are some of the thoughts about the collective body up here on how you're going to use it?
As being a big skeptic of it, sir, when it was first installed, bottom line was, and I was old school, but right now I don't think I could find an MTP in any brigade that's been deployed that wants to go in or do anything without CBM. It needs to be on all fleets. We need to kind of standardize it, and we probably need to, I think we've marched down the road long enough on it of it's going to save us money because of unnecessary TBOs aren't going to happen. Well, you know what, sir, quite honestly, it saves us time and money on the flight line. We can identify a fault a lot quicker. We can go right to that component instead of wasting, and in combat, that's essential. Bird out of the fight is bad news because it's not in phase. It's just on the ramp, and I can't use it. But with CBM, we were able to actually troubleshoot quite a bit of things that I've seen in the past before we installed it. I'd be out there 10 days with some of the best test pilots trying to figure it out. I think we need it, but I think we need to show the enterprise, not necessarily that we're saving on TBOs, because I don't even know if we got that data yet, but quite honestly, on Oles, there's a lot of unused icons. How about we have the letter C or whatever to when discovered, how discovered, or how recognized, and that means you use CBM to do it. That's Oles data, and people would be amazed at how often HUMS or any of the CBM stuff is used to fix problems, because then we'd have a record of it. There's no way to record it now.
Yeah, there's a concern there that we fielded CBM. It was not a clean fielding. It was a great fielding, but the enemy of good was better. It wasn't a traditional acquisition program. We had to get it to fight, so you had different systems out there, so you didn't have embedded training the way you wanted to have it and roll it out for troubleshooting and those things. So we've still got work to do, but to your point, it is providing lift. Now there's other things that CBM can bring to us, probably even bring even a more significant impact to Army Aviation in terms of dollars and costs. And I don't know, John, if you want to talk about that, or I can, however you.
Go ahead.
Okay, so here's just a quick points. Two things. First of all, we understand TBOs. Let's talk about TBOs for a second. We know about 20% of all TBO items actually make it to TBO. Anybody surprised with that number? Get that number. Okay, here's why. Nicks, dents, scratches, corrosion. For whatever reason, the housings, the types of gearboxes we have, and internal and external, they just don't make it for a lot of cases just because we have exceeded the limits of nicks, dents, scratches, and there's corrosion that's happening. If we had housings, if we had those things that would allow us to extend our TBOs out for the full life of it, we could actually do something pretty unique here in terms of drive down overall costs for TBOs, okay, for the life cycle. Now, how do you come up with a TBO? How do you come up with scheduled maintenance inside of the Army? How did the engineers with those golden slide rules come up with how long can this gearbox work? When do I have to do scheduled maintenance? They assumed that the aircraft's going to fly in the worst flight conditions for the full hour that it's flying in that flight. Do we think our aircraft, do we think our Apache always flies backwards at 30 knots, sideways for 60 knots, is always out of ground effect, and is always at max torque? No, we don't. But that's how we assume it's going to be for the full life cycle of that, so that we can assure ourselves that we've got the right factor plugged in. Wouldn't it be nice if we had something that would tell us what the actual flight profile is of an aircraft? Yeah, what's it called? It's called condition-based maintenance. If you can understand the flight profile of it so that you would know I'm not flying in that condition, potentially I ought to be able to extend out my TBO, I ought to be able to extend out my scheduled maintenance, which is more important than the TBO. If I could extend it, and all of a sudden I've driven down the cost. How do you do that with tail rotor, main rotor, gearboxes, starter generators, everything else? I don't know. Potentially it's what you do in your car, which says if I'm going to drive in town, in city, in a particular condition, then my scheduled maintenance is this. If I'm going to drive normal operations, it's this. And maybe I have 2 or 3 windows that I can operate this aircraft in. As long as I'm in that window most of the time, here's my scheduled maintenance. I don't know, but it seems to me it's worth the journey to use the tools we have that we didn't have before, and condition-based maintenance gives us that to allow us to see ourselves so we can actually be predictive as we move forward. Just a thought, okay? So the question is, but here's the thing, you can't get to CBM, because I failed when I was at AMCOM to get us to come together. You can't do that of CBM and extend it until you meet the first hurdle, which is make your TBO items meet TBO standard. So it's about you guys figuring out how at Corpus and at AMCOM and G4 funding it, and in the special ops community, and you doing it. How do you do that? How do we pull the right people together to focus on getting TBO items to meet their timelines so we can then take it to the next phase, which then allows you, Al, to go into the building in a kind of a unique way and say, you fund me for the procurement and RDT&E to do this. I'll take a hit in my flying hour program 5 years from now. Big bet, but at the same time, you should probably be able to do that. But it's all about driving down our soldiers over maintaining their airplanes, because that's what we're doing right now. just a thought about that whole sequence. CBM, huge enabler on the battlefield like you talked about, which is huge, Brother Butler. But that's just, now let me shut up, give you guys a chance to talk about that.
I think on one comment on CBM, it's not there's no enduring funding stream for condition-based maintenance. So that's one of the challenges General Myles is talking about, that you got to go from the OCO to base transition for CBM, and you have to prove the value of it. And I think we've all seen it, but we have to go to the building in a concerted effort and tell them we need money for analysis, we need money for engineers to do the analysis, we need money for data storage, those kind of things. And right now, ASALT is about to make a decision on which PEO that they're going to choose to be the lead, I guess, facilitator for condition-based maintenance. So we don't know who that's going to be yet. I think PEO Aviation's on tap possibly to be one of those. Another one of the PEOs is also being looked at right now. That decision should be made pretty soon, but again, it comes with no money. So we're going to have to fight together to figure out where this funding's going to come from so those guys can actually do the job and help you guys out in the field do better maintenance.
Right. Thoughts about this? Yeah, go ahead, Al.
Just from the funding stream, the G4 has spent a lot of time this year on CBM Plus, and on the ground side, they have captured and highlighted the effectiveness of CBM Plus, almost made it a little more effective than I thought it was based on some conversations I've had. Some of the conversations with them is they're really focusing on just the sensor side of the house. And some of the discussions is don't put all your weight just on the sensors, but they're going down that road. And I will tell you, in the G4 side of the house, it's let's support it, let's fund it, because it's paying for itself or has the potential to pay itself. So there's already people, I mean, General Mason is all over supporting CBM Plus, and it's one of his priorities. If you look on his Palm Build slide, it made the top 10.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Jim.
Yeah, sir. Okay. Yeah, I'd just like to offer a couple of comments on that. Is number one, I don't think enough people in the Army really understand what CBM Plus is. There's CBM and then there's CBM Plus. They're two different things. CBM Plus, if you read the OSD documents, if you read the DA documents, is a huge umbrella that covers everything we do in aviation and maintenance. It's not just about sensors. Sensors is just one source of information that you get that comes in. And to me, the way the Army is really going to get the maximum efficiency from what the potential is of CBM Plus or whatever the people that hate it because it's something new they didn't think of, don't like that term, where you're really going to optimize the effectiveness of CBM Plus is between that partnership between PEOs, AMCOM, and MARDEC. It takes everybody, all those different stakeholders, working together to really optimize and reduce those maintenance procedures. Why are you removing engines? Why are you removing a specific component? Who's looking at that removal criteria because it's screwed up in the first place? It took General Eisner down at South Carolina National Guard. They used to have leaking seals on Apache tail rotor gearboxes. Some grad students down there came up with a tool to allow people to replace those seals in the field. Took AMCOM 2 years to get that approved, and General Eisner raising all kinds of stink. Huge savings there, but regardless of where that information comes, and I just offer this to John, I think a critical piece in any aviation platform and different aviation platforms out there are a little ahead, a little behind other aviation platforms in implementing and really squeezing the benefits out of CBM Plus is if I was a PM, I'd have one of my number one guys leading that CBM work group in my PM office. Because that CBM work group, all the data and stuff kind of flows in there. You got engineers, you got log guys, you got guys sitting around the table to look at different courses of action and things you can do, whether it's changing maintenance procedures, maintenance processes, inspection, making a reliability component on that. And back to your comment, sir, about TBOs. Well, I won't tell you who, but I had a guy tell me one time, he said, well, Jim, not new, I'm kind of new about CBM, but my log chief told me, what do we need CBM for? Nothing ever meets TBO anyway. And my jaw almost hit the floor when I said, well, maybe Mr. PM, that's why you need condition-based maintenance. That's why you need the information coming in and somebody looking at it. and figuring out why isn't that component making TBO. And of course, if I was him, I'd have grabbed the tech chief, and the log chief says, okay, chief, if it's not meeting TBO, why? But I think the thing out of here, the Army can get the real benefit is it's really going to take that all the stakeholders, PM, AMCOM, AMRDEC, everybody working together, better education of people in the units so that people in the units really understand the potential benefit. Because if you got some young hotshot major, lieutenant colonel coming out of the field, going into the building there, if he doesn't understand the potential of that tool, and it's a tool, it's not a silver bullet, then it doesn't get funded. If it doesn't get funded, the guys in AMCOM don't have the resources to go continue to make those improvements on components to get the removal time of a component extended. You don't keep that component on wing longer, you don't get the cost avoidance.
All right, hey Jim, let's wrap this up. Okay, so let me see if anybody's got any questions back here. You guys got about a lot of brain power up here. Not from me, but from these guys. Questions? Who's got a mic? Questions? It's your chance. Go ahead.
Talking about CBM, I know from a condition indicator maturing those things, a lot of the drivers to that has been the increased op tempo and the increased data that's been available. As we draw down our flight, our op tempo, is there any expectation on how that'll impact how long it takes to improve those condition indicators, the data for that analysis, to collect enough data to have a valid answer to say that this part is bad, this is good, based on whatever the indication is? We looked at the trade-off of the lower op tempos extending out that CI maturity timeline.
It's a good question. Is the effectiveness of CBM, does it go down based on a lower op tempo? Does it matter? No?
We're currently installing all those sensors and everything on the Rucker fleet. Rucker flies 40% of the hours that our Army flies, whether we're in combat or not. It goes up in peacetime. So we're going to continue to build that data and help us. Now the difference is the environment. Because in Rucker we're flying hard stand, but at the same time you got brand new aviators that bounce the aircraft around a little bit more. So there's some trade-off there in that data, but we'll continue to collect the data.
Okay. Any other questions?
No, but I'd like to say one thing, sir, if I can. With the CBM, it's all the cost-wise umbrella that you were talking about, and one of them is corrosion. And I don't know how many people have met Steve Carr, but again, it falls into, and I mean, he waits around for hours to show you his spiel, and he's an incredible American. All right, but all I have to say is that's part of CBM also. If you look at what we can save, or just, sir, you were talking about the environment. What are the three factors? Designs, environment, and preventive maintenance. And then where does it affect us with corrosion? The aircraft, AGSC, and Class 9 in supply. If you can get some of these numbers and the way we can go there with CBM, just how it relates to corrosion, that's a whole nother area that we can make a positive impact on.
No, Matt, we put a climatized facility for your parts. That's good.
I know we're running long here, sir, but real quick is in Special Operations Aviation, we have to control the whole life cycle of our unique parts. So we can stick a cover on a can and prevent water from intruding the top of that thing that looks like a 55-gallon oil drum. And by that, we save millions of dollars. So we do preventive corrosion prevention maintenance on not only the aircraft, but the parts that store the aircraft, the hangars, and the warehouses that store the parts. So if anybody in this room ever wants to come to Fort Campbell and see our, whatever you want to call it, Corrosion Center of Excellence, feel free. We've had the opportunity to do it. We've used cocoon covers. We've enclosed our pole barns. We have dehumidification capability everywhere. So it really had, when you lose 2 or 3 transmissions, aft shafts, you name it, C-boxes, that's another favorite one for corrosion, then you truly see the value in spending a few $1 million on preventing that corrosion.
Roger that. Sir, you have one more question, and we'll wrap it up.
I came in late, sir. Did you talk about OR rate, 75% OR rate? Is that pertinent to our readiness discussion?
No, we didn't talk about it. In fact, we had a discussion earlier today about the fact about maybe the validity of it may not be the same as it used to be in terms of.
Maybe the validity isn't the same. It kind of piggybacks on the point here about the flow chart and 50%. You pay a lot of money to keep 50%, and your fight tonight forces, you probably need 60%. But an Army National Guard force doesn't need it, and maybe an Army National Guard or U.S. Army Reserve force might not need to struggle and fight very hard to keep 75%.
Yeah.
Because that's about maintaining platoon level readiness and some civil support operations. But it's a lot of money if you want to be 75% OR day in and day out for a force that's months away from the battlefield. But the Army National Guard got the G4 of the Army up their shorts about 2 years ago because you weren't making 75%. And you're going, you want to give me a lot of money? I'll make you happy, General.
Yeah.
But you don't want to give me all that money. You do not want to pay for every Guard and U.S. Army Reserve aircraft to be at 75, or the fleets to be at 75 OR, do you? Not really.
I'm with you. Okay, so look, first of all, I want to thank the panel. John, thanks for being here. Sammy and Don and Garner, thanks for being here. Matt, Al, thanks. You guys are you're the future, and appreciate your input here and what you're doing for Army Aviation. You're leading forward. Appreciate everybody's participation. Significant lessons learned here, and I just hope we carry it forward here. And the one takeaway I would tell us is that one thing we all got to collectively talk about is that the underpinning of everything we just talked about was we were resourced for this fight. And we got to make sure we continue to tell that message at every level possible. Without being resourced, we couldn't have done what we did in the fight the last 14 years. Thanks for participating.